Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Discovering Shakespeare. And how are we going to be discovering Shakespeare? Well, basically, we'll be asking questions. Questions about Shakespeare, about the mysterious William Shakespeare. You'll see why I say he's a mysterious author to explore. And here, specifically, are some of the questions I would like you to think about as we are going through, step by step, discovering Shakespeare. There are 8 questions. And when I ask these questions, you won't be able to answer directly, but I want you to think about each question before I give you my opinion or give you information about each of the questions. So there you are. We're going to be asking about his family, his education, his childhood, his upbringing, and a couple of other strange things about the mysterious Mr. Shakespeare. So let's go. Think about one thing that you think you know or have heard about Shakespeare's life and work. Anything. Just think. Think. What do you know about him? His life, his work, his character, anything unusual. Right. I hope you're thinking. For example, you may have thought, oh, I know, his father was this or that. Well, his father was various things, but we know him as someone who made gloves, a glove maker. There he is on the left, and there's William, the young William Shakespeare, with one of his father's gloves. He was a glove maker, a very humble job, if you like. You may know something about his school days. He went to school. Or did he? It's a question. What do we know about his school days? You must think a great writer like Shakespeare must have gone to a good school. Perhaps he went to university. In fact, we have no evidence at all that he went to school. Think about it. We do know for a fact that he got married to Anne Hathaway, and he had, well, they had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The boy died. His name was Hamnet. Hamnet. But you know, Shakespeare's story is like a fairy tale. It's what we call a rags to riches story. In other words, he began his life very poor, unknown, and he went to London one day from where he was born in Stratford, and he became rich and famous. We are told, for example, that he left Stratford, where he was born, because he was caught, as we see in the picture on the left, stealing deer from a rich man's property. So he ran away to London to escape punishment. And then on the right, we see a picture of this fairy tale where Shakespeare, we are told, held horses outside the theatres in London. These are some of the legends. We don't know if they are facts about William Shakespeare. For example, we don't know, but people say he left Stratford one day when a theatre company from London came to visit Stratford. And he liked the theatre so much, and they needed an actor, that he left Stratford with the theatre and went to London. But we don't know this. We think so. There is no evidence for this. And of course, we know, or we think we know, that he had a very close connection with the theatre in London, and particularly one of the theatres which became known as, perhaps you know the name, there is one in London today. There is a copy of this theatre in London today, exactly the same as it was in Shakespeare's day. Do you know the name of it? You must have read about the famous Globe Theatre, which opened in 1599. So we know that Shakespeare worked there as an actor, probably, as a businessman, probably, perhaps a writer. We don't know for sure. Now, you may know, however, his most famous words, the most famous words in any English poem or play or book. These words by Shakespeare are very famous. Do you know any of these words? Can you guess which are the most famous words in the English language, probably, after the Bible? And they are to be, or I'm sure you can finish Hamlet's famous speech. To be or not to be? That is the question. The famous Hamlet. Which play? Of course, it's Hamlet, perhaps his most famous play. And here is a picture from Hamlet. And also you may have heard of another play by Shakespeare. This is from a film of the play with Leonardo DiCaprio on the right, playing the young man in love. And it's the greatest love story in literature, perhaps. And it's Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet, the most famous love story ever written. You may be wondering, well, who am I to tell you this? Well, my name's Luke Prodromou, and I grew up in England. And there's my school, top left there. And it was here in Birmingham, at this school, that I first came into contact with the mysterious William Shakespeare. And it was a play by him called Julius Caesar, and I loved it. It was love at first sight. I mean, not with Shakespeare, but with the play and his plays. I fell in love with the works of William Shakespeare. And I loved them so much that when I finished university in Bristol, I applied to study more about Shakespeare here. Sorry, there we are. Bottom left, at the Shakespeare Institute, Birmingham, which is a centre where you can study everything about Shakespeare. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to spend my life watching Shakespeare, reading Shakespeare, teaching Shakespeare. And here at the top we see a picture of Stratford and the theatre, Shakespeare's theatre today in Stratford upon Avon. And when I was at school, I used to go regularly to watch plays at the Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford. Eventually, I leave Britain and I come to Greece. And in Greece, in Thessaloniki, I taught Shakespeare to the students, and I taught them all about the life of William Shakespeare. But you know, I loved the works of Shakespeare, but I always thought his life was a bit disappointing, mysterious. There was very little to connect the life of this man with the wonderful poetry, the inspiring plays I was reading. So this was a mystery to me. And as I told the students this story about him leaving Stratford and becoming rich and famous, it all seemed to me a little bit strange, mysterious, disappointing. So one day when I was in London, I go to a bookshop and I pick up a book called The Mystery or The Mysterious William Shakespeare. And in this, I read things which surprised me and changed my thinking about William Shakespeare. The book said very simply that this man that I had been teaching, the man from Stratford, did not actually write the works of Shakespeare, the famous Shakespeare. And that's why today, for me, it's a mystery and one that I want to ask questions about. So that's why today we're asking questions. Let's go then to begin our journey and look at Shakespeare with his family at home in Stratford, his father, his mother, his wife Anne, and here's one of his daughters, Susanna. We'll come back to their life at home. It's very important. So where was he born? I've mentioned it several times. Can you remember where he was born? And this will be important as we discover the mysterious William Shakespeare. He was born in a small town called Stratford. And he was born on April the 23rd, 1564. And we'll ask questions about Stratford and his birthplace and why it is part of the mystery of this man. Let's think about Stratford so you understand why I say it's a part of a puzzle. The population, the number of people in Stratford, was it a small number, 1,500, 15,000, 150,000? Was it like Larissa? Was it like a village? Well, we'll see. And why this is important. Of course, Shakespeare went to London, as we said. Can you imagine in those days, without trains, without planes, how long it took to get from Stratford to London? 4 days, 6 days, 10 days? And why is this important? I've mentioned his father already. You should know the answer to number 3. What did his father do? He sold gloves, books, or corn? Corn. We make bread from corn. Did they have books in the house? Did he sell books, Mr. Shakespeare? Well, the answer is, of course, that Stratford was a small place. It took 4 to 10 days to get to London, and his father sold gloves, as we said. Now, this is strange because Shakespeare, when he writes his plays and poems, does he write about the farmers of Stratford, the working people of Stratford, or does he write about something different, the aristocrats, the rich and the powerful? Well, he wrote about the aristocrats. Strangely, he did not write about the people he grew up with in Stratford, farmers, ordinary people, the middle classes, the working classes. He wrote about the aristocrats. His plays are aristocratic, almost every single one. Although his birth was a poor kind of birth, in a poor village, a town, a small town. His plays are all about the world of the aristocracy, the powerful and the rich. And when he wrote his plays, he often criticized the Queen and the Prime Minister. This, for me, was a mystery. How could an ordinary man from Stratford criticize, make fun of the powerful Queen Elizabeth I and her powerful Prime Minister? There he is, Mr. Burley. And how could he get away with it without being punished? He even shows us the Prime Minister, or a portrait of him, in the play Hamlet. And he shows us this most powerful man, the chief advisor to the Queen, the Prime Minister, let's call him, being killed by Hamlet. And Hamlet makes fun of this guy, and he kills him behind the curtain there, you see. How could Shakespeare do this and get away with it, I wondered. And something else. Let's look at writing, because he was a writer. And the most basic writing is when we write our own name. This is a signature. Can you guess whose signature it is? It's my signature, Luke Prodromou. And when I sign my name, I sign like this. Now you take a piece of paper, and as I talk, can you write your signature once and write it again twice? Please take a piece of paper and a pencil, or just think about your signature. When you write it once or twice or three times, is it the same or different each time? Are your signatures more or less similar or very different from each other? Well, I would like to say that generally our signatures are very similar. They must be similar. The police expect them to be similar. Banks expect our signature to be more or less the same every time we use it. Now, let me show you these signatures. Are they the signatures of the same man? Have a look. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 signatures. How many men or women, it's actually men, wrote these signatures? 1, 2. Are they the same? They are actually supposed to be the signatures of William Shakespeare. And do they look the same or different? Well, for me, generally, they look very different. None of them is the same as another. There you are. They're all William Shakespeare's signature. And not only do they look different, but the spelling is different in every case. This is a bit odd for one of the most eloquent, the greatest writers of any time, that when he writes his signature, it looks a bit weird, strange. How come? Was he ill? Was he sick? Did he have some kind of problem? And if we go into the house, into Shakespeare's home in Stratford, and ask a simple question, are there any books in the home? Any books in your home, in your flat, your house? Look around. I bet you have quite a few books in your home. But Shakespeare is the greatest writer who ever lived, in English at least. And you know, there are no books in his house. No books, as far as we know, because his mother and father and his children, they did not know how to read, and they could hardly write. And we know they couldn't write because they signed their names, not with a signature, like you or me, or any person who can read and write, but they signed their name with a mark, like this. There you are. Now, this is the greatest man, the greatest writer in English. And his family had no books, and they could not read or write, and he did not teach his children to read or write. Mysterious. Now, I'm going to ask another question. He wrote a lot of plays, a lot of poems. There you are. At least 39 plays, 154 sonnets at least, and 4 long poems in his shortish life. He died in his 50s. And I asked, how did he find the time to do all this? How did he know how to do all this? I asked you earlier, did he go to school? The local grammar school. There was a very good grammar school in Stratford. Did Shakespeare go there? Well, as I told you, we have no evidence at all that he went to this school. But we think he did, because he was a great writer. Therefore, he must have done. And when he traveled to London, it took him from 4 to 10 days. And he went back and forth, to and fro, from Stratford to London, from London to Stratford, and from Stratford to London again and again. This must have taken a lot of time. In very bad weather, probably, English weather. You see, why is this important? Because I asked, where did he find the time to do all of this? If he was a busy actor, a businessman in the theatre, he must have done his writing, we are told, after work. Can you imagine yourself after a day's work, going home or to the tavern and sitting in a corner writing your masterpieces? This is what we are told to believe. He must have done his writing after work because he was a busy theatre man, a busy businessman. I find this very difficult to imagine. He must have been exhausted. And it was very dark in those days. You needed a candle to be able to see, to read or write. He was a very busy man. And if you look at his life in Stratford and in London, sometimes if you read carefully, you see that he's supposed to be in 2 places at the same time. Quite strange. Magic. Is such a busy man. But what did his fellow writers say about this man, this mysterious William Shakespeare from Stratford? Well, the only thing that's really written about him is in 1592 by this writer of the time, Robert Greene. Robert Greene writes about the man from Stratford. And what does he say about him? Let's see. So this fellow writer of Shakespeare, Robert Greene, called Shakespeare a number of different names. And this was one of them. He called him what? This is a picture in English of what we call a puppet. A puppet. Not a real man, you know, a puppet. So the great writer, William Shakespeare from Stratford, for his contemporary, his fellow writer, Mr. Greene, was a puppet, which is a very negative thing. And he also said he was a crow. Here's the bird. It's called a crow. It's often black and dull, not interesting, not beautiful. And this writer says about the man from Stratford that he was a crow, but he made himself beautiful with the feathers of other writers. In other words, he stole other people's words, other people's plays, and he put his own name to this work. This is what Robert Greene says about Shakespeare. He also says he was an ape. There he is, an ape. What does an ape or a monkey do? He steals, is the implication, is the idea. He copies, he imitates, he steals from other writers. What a strange thing to say about the greatest writer who ever lived, that he's a puppet, a crow, an ape, a cheat, and more, much more, a cruel moneylender who takes money from his fellow writers, who steals their manuscripts. A nasty man on the whole. This is what they say. This is what they said about him. Now, let's change to a happier subject. Shakespeare had a favorite country. Can you guess from this picture which his favorite country was? In Europe. And the country is, of course, Italy. And the city here is Venice, I think. So Shakespeare loved Italy. He was passionate about Italy. You too may have been to Italy. It's still a very beautiful country. Venice, Florence, Rome, beautiful cities. Verona. Shakespeare loved Italy. He loved Italy so much, he wrote play after play about Italy. Plays set in Italy, comedies, tragedies, all in Italy. A great number of his plays. But why do I mention this? So what? My favorite country is Greece or Spain. Why is this important? Because it shows us, if we read carefully, that Shakespeare knew Italy very well, as if he had visited, as if he had been there. This is not knowledge from a book, because the things he says, you could only know if you went to Italy, as he must have done. For example, these two paintings. One of them, Shakespeare must have seen in the original in Italy, because he writes about one of them as if he had seen it, because you could not see this painting anywhere else. These two paintings are of the same subject. One of Shakespeare's poems is called Venus and Adonis, about Aphrodite and a young man called Adonis. And the painting that Shakespeare describes in this poem seems to be one of these two. And the difference between them, you see, is that in this one, Mr. Adonis is wearing a hat. There, you see? And when Shakespeare writes his poem, he refers to the painting where Adonis wears a hat. And only in this painting could you see Venus and Adonis, with Adonis wearing a hat. You had to go to Venice, in other words, to see it, where the painter lived. Only in Venice. Strange. So Shakespeare, we conclude, from this and many other examples which I can't give you now, he must have visited Italy. He mentions in Othello a particular place in Venice. He mentions in The Merchant of Venice a particular place near Venice, and so on and so forth. Now let's go to the end of our story. And at the end of one's life, we die, but if we're careful, we write our will before we die. And this is William Stratford's will, William of Stratford. He wrote a will. When you die, you say, I'm going to write my will. This is what I want to happen with everything I have after I die. The will. So think now, think. A famous writer, a great writer. What will he mention, do you think, in his or her will? Think. Something to do with writing, perhaps. But in William of Stratford's will, there is no reference to the life of a writer, no books, no documents, no other people, writers, patrons, people who were supporting him, helping him. Nothing. No people, no books, no objects, nothing. So he dies. Now, when a famous person dies, and he was the greatest writer of the time, what do you think people will say when they hear the bad news? You hear that a famous person today has died, a writer, an actor, or whatever. what do you think they will say? Something about this person. Well, this is what they said about Mr. Shakespeare from Stratford. Can you see that? The answer is, what did they say? Nothing. His death in 1616 was greeted by absolute silence. None of these things happened. None of these things were mentioned, as if he was an anonymous beggar in the street. Mysterious. So, I conclude. What I want you to do, as you read about literature and Shakespeare, always, always ask questions. Be critical. Think for yourselves. We've asked these questions today about his family, his school, his hometown, his growing up, the things he wrote about, his signature, other writers, and his favorite country. There are many, many, many more questions. And all I want you to do is, if you agree with me that the answer to these questions creates a puzzle, a mystery between the life of this man and the great writer that we know. So please remember to ask questions. And my conclusion is to ask you, did the man from Stratford then write these plays? Where did he get the knowledge? Where did he find the time? Why do we have no written evidence that the man from Stratford was the same man who wrote the plays and the poems? Why is there no absolute concrete piece of evidence that the name William Shakespeare is not a pseudonym for someone else? Perhaps he went to grammar school and learned all of these things from school, but we have no evidence. Or perhaps he was a genius. And if you are a genius, you can do anything. Perhaps. Think of other geniuses. Is this genius? Thank you very much. Our play today is done, and I'll try to please you every day. Thank you for your attention.